when we think about the Paxos issue, you believe that there will be a pretty profound impact on stable coins broadly. What will that impact be?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting about the BUSD case is that today BUSD is mostly just used on Binance and on Binance Smart Chain, which is the blockchain operated by the exchange. BUSD doesn't really have much use on other cryptocurrency exchanges. So that's why this regulatory action was very much targeted Binance and not necessarily stablecoins as a whole, because Paxos was the one to issue BUSD. However, I don't think this makes other stablecoin issuers immune, specifically USDC and USDT, although it will be very difficult to regulate Tether simply because the largest stablecoin is not actually domiciled in the United States.
That was a part of the conversation, right? Binance positioning BUSD as a strong competitor to Tether. Their market shares have changed proportionately over the last few years. Where does that leave us in the relationship between BUSD and Tether?
So this morning we looked at on Binance and we found that 35% of total trade volume on Binance is actually denominated in BUSD. This is up from 20% at the start of the year, and I think Binance has made a huge marketing push to actually get more users of BUSD. So it seems that they were very much not expecting this move, this regulatory enforcement action, and Binance is actually incentivized to have their own stablecoin because stablecoins are very useful within DeFi ecosystems. And what I mean by this is Binance Smart Chain and any type of decentralized protocol that is part of the Binance ecosystem. So now that they don't have this lever of growth, essentially we're now left with Tether. Tether today accounts for the vast majority of all trading activity in crypto. So BUSD actually was a nice counterweight to Tether's influence. As we've seen in crypto, it's never good to have all risk concentrated in a single centralized entity. But I'm afraid that with Tether, we sort of have this now.
Tether can't be regulated in the US because it's not domiciled here. Now, Binance was using Paxos that was regulated in the US. Could they have a different issuer for a BUSD somewhere else so that they can ensure they still have a stable coin, but it's not under the legal oversight of the United States?
Yeah, theoretically, yes. And I think that's the biggest critique with this type of enforcement action is that it's not getting to the root of the problem. And rather what you would see is actually a type of regulatory arbitrage. That's what we see with all of the exchanges that don't have their headquarters in the United States, is they're simply finding jurisdictions where they can operate and do what they want.
Is there going to be an overall global means of regulating in the near future? Is anyone talking with other countries? Have we got any sort of clout other than the SEC?
That's a good question. I know that in Europe, they've taken a much broader approach to regulation and actually taken the path of issuing guidance rather than enforcement actions. And so we can already see that there's a large difference across regions. But I think for now, it's going to be very difficult to get a global approach because there will always be jurisdictions that are trying to attract business first. And that always comes with crypto actors that are sort of looking for the friendliest jurisdictions.
We were talking with Medalie a few moments ago about the distinction between what we're seeing with Binance, Paxos, and what we saw last week from the SEC and Kraken. And in our conversation with Gary Gensler, what's your read on that specific situation with the SEC basically cracking down on unlicensed security offerings?
I think that Kraken had one of the largest centralized staking providers, but it was very different from what we saw on Coinbase. But that doesn't mean that Coinbase is not immune from a regulatory action against their staking service. But there were key differences and like sort of the nitty-gritty of how each one was run. And I think that's what attracted the SEC to first go after Krakens. I also think Coinbase is likely to put up a fight. They have a lot more to lose in this case because they've actually successfully diversified their revenue into the staking business over the past year. And I think one key thing I want to emphasize is that staking is not like the returns on your assets that you got with the centralized lenders such as Celsius. It's a lot different. Staking is something fundamental to blockchain technology, and specifically the Ethereum blockchain. And so it's actually benefiting most people that are staking. There's no losers to staking today.
Clara, when you're out there having conversations with players inside the world of crypto and those that are sort of interested bystanders and then those that are regulating, ultimately the calling card of many a company, particularly in the US, has been, we want regulation. Do they like this sort of regulation that they're currently seeing?
Well, this is regulation by enforcement. I don't think anyone really likes regulation by enforcement, but that doesn't mean that the industry doesn't like regulation. In fact, after FTX, everyone's expecting this. In fact, it's much needed for any centralized service provider. We're seeing after the Celsius, the FTX collapse, is that you can't really operate with some degree of regulation or transparency. And it's more the enforcement actions that are catching the industry off guard.